So, welcome everybody. My name is Linda Balfe. I'm one of the directors here in Aspen Counselling. And today we are delighted to be joined by Lynn Ruane, Senator Lynn Ruane, I should say, who has been doing Trojan work within her community and within South Dublin. So we are joined also today by Aisling, our play therapist, and Carmel, who's one of our senior therapists as well, and William Johnson, who is another therapist here in Aspen. And we just want to, I suppose part of rolling out these videos, we just want to generate a conversation and to look at, individual stories of, and, how they have, handled, life situations, because given the fact that COVID-19 has made us all reflect around, how we've been living. And here's an opportunity among the five of us here today that we're going to share, how we're handling it and maybe some suggestions as therapists, how to support you guys out there that are watching in. So welcome, Lynn. We're delighted to have you here today.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
And I suppose just for those that, may not know you, Lynn, love to hear, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you are so passionate about, working within your community and how it all started.
Yeah. I'll try and capture, I suppose, a long enough journey in a short space of time. So stop me if I'm moving too fast. I've grown up in Killinarden and Tala. We moved out here from Ballymun when I was very, very young. And I've been here all my life. I haven't gone very far. I still live at home with my mother. I've moved out once or twice, but I keep coming back. I think the reason for coming back so much is I don't think anywhere else has felt quite like home for me. I've always felt safe in this house, I suppose, and it pulls me back. And my parents, I suppose, over the years helped me very much in raising my daughters as well. So we'd be a family unit with my brother and with my mum. So I went to the KCS, which Carmel would have went to as well. And I finished school quite early. I didn't really get on too well in school, not for academic reasons, more so for just the structure of school. I enjoyed some parts and really hated other parts. And I suppose that was a real struggle for me to be able to engage in school life, especially when I hit secondary school. I suppose the first portion of my life up until I was around 11, 12 was just like any average child, out playing street games with their friends and, he was playing sports and playing soccer and table tennis and in youth clubs and the usual. And then, there was a real kind of dramatic shift, I suppose, in my early teens that kind of took my life on a trajectory that is the one that's most spoke about now, or the one I most analyse or use, I suppose, in a way to be able to tell my story. So when I was very young, I witnessed the passing of a friend in an accident, a road traffic accident, and that kind of really altered my view on the world at the time. I was really, really young. I was only 13 at the time, and I suppose internally at the time, it had a massive traumatic impact on me, which none of us would have really understood at the time. We wouldn't have had a language or a way to explain the trauma that I felt, but I suffered terribly with nightmares for years. And throughout those years, I became really chaotic in my behaviour. My pal wasn't the first friend to die very young, and I started witnessing death at a very unnatural rate for a child. And I didn't really have any frame for that. I had no way to really understand that. And although I had two very loving parents and a safe household, I suppose the impact of outside of the household was too much of a force to fully protect me from what was happening all around me. So school kind of was something that didn't really matter to me anymore. I kind of got it into my head very young that life was as insignificant as that you could just be there and gone and that's it. So why really take the time to engage in these lifelong things like education or whatever else that might be to a 13-year-old. And I kind of start living very much in the present, but in a completely way that we wouldn't promote. But I was very much living in the moment of every single decision was made on a whim. I'd say I possibly had post-traumatic stress disorder, which would have went undiagnosed. When I look back now, and I've learned so much about it over the years, it definitely fits in terms of flashbacks. And so at a very young age, I was quite chaotic, but was quite enjoyed the chaos, which seems odd to say, but I look back on it romanticizing about how fun it all was, which is really strange. But I think sometimes we have to tell ourselves these stories to make sense of the different things that we did along the way. And so I left school for 3 years. I was quite, a lot of drug taking and criminality, really, 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 really angry. My temper was really, it was hard to explain. My temper was very, very short, and my parents would have took a lot of the brunt of that. And they weren't parents that had a temper themselves, so it was very, very hard for them to manage and understand. And there was no drug use in my family or no addiction in my family, so that was very hard for them to understand. So everything I was presenting to them was so foreign to them that they didn't really quite know how to manage that. And they tried, everything from social workers to psychiatrists but when you're at that age and that young, it's very hard to get somebody to engage in a process when they've kind of just tipped beyond a certain point, and they're so young, so they can't really invest that this might be a good thing for them. Because to be honest, I didn't really want to engage in a good thing because I was so full of turmoil. So it's
Lynn, sorry to stop you there. I suppose when you're speaking about that death of your friend, I suppose obviously that was felt in the wider community as well. And it was, I remember, I don't know the girl, I didn't know the girl, but I remember hearing of it. And there happened to be a couple of accidents kind of around that time that were really quite horrible. But it was something that kind of just happened, and nobody really talked about how to deal with it afterwards. It was there all the time, and it was felt but not spoken about.
Yeah.
So
and that in school was the same, which I was, even when I was, even though I was a chaotic teenager, I was extremely intuitive, and I was a thinker, and I analysed things, and I looked at things, I looked at people's responses, and I would know that something wasn't right, so I remember going to school and feeling everyone like, did that happened 2 or 3 days ago, and all these people are just getting on with their day and their life, and am I meant to just sit in that classroom and nobody's going to talk about, what I mean? So I remember realizing how life just went on as if it didn't really matter, and that happened repeatedly and still happens in my life. I still have the same friend circle, and funerals are a constant thing for young people and people around here for various different reasons, whether it be tragedies, whether it be because of drugs, mental health, and risk taking. I think when you feel like you've nothing to lose or nothing to live for, your ability to assess risk is very, very low. I found that I didn't really take risk into account when I made decisions, and that would have put myself in, that meant I would have put myself, and my friends would have put themselves into situations where accidents happened then as well. So a death might be accidental, might have fell off a wall, or might have, whatever, but it was the process by which we made those decisions to be so, lackadaisy with our life and our own care. And I always found that quite interesting. But I would have self-medicated a huge lot through that. So drug use was both fun at the time for me, but it was also as a way to completely knock myself out sometimes. And
it sounds like it was a way of you actually getting a bit of an escape from
a release from reality. Yeah.
What was going on?
I never found that I wanted to not be alive as such, but I definitely wanted to be momentarily removed from existence with the option to exist again, which is always a fine line to try and manage in terms of making sure that you don't end up accidentally, hurting yourself by overdosing on ridiculous amount of drugs for a small little girl's body, So that kind of meant that I wasn't really engaged in school anymore. I didn't really see the point. I didn't think I'd live to adulthood. And I very much then start to live my life at a rapid speed. It's like I try to fit as much in as quickly as possible, just in case I died. So I made what I thought were very conscious and rational decisions at the time to just do everything and try everything. And, you know, that just meant that my life sped up very, very quickly. I became a mother at 15.
Lynn, could I just, because could just talk about something there for a second, if it's okay. Like you say with the drugs and that you know, you're risk taking, but you knock yourself out. But as someone who's come through all that trauma that you've talked about and the risk taking, is there anything that you know would like to advise or to say to people, kids now 13 to 15, that, you know, if they're out there and they're in, you know, taking those risks, and what, and you know, and you haven't come through that, what is there something you could say to them if, you know, reach for help? Or
yeah, like I think the easy thing would be to say to reach for help. I think what becomes more difficult is when we as the rest of society, or we as adults, or we as the education system, or we as communities have to instead look at how we instead create environments where there was always a different option from the offset, instead of a reaction to a child already engaged in drug taking or already feeling traumatized, but instead that we've built communities and families that had access to alternative approaches or are not experiencing. I experienced several deaths and violence, and so it's very hard to know what could have been done for me at the time. And I think different people will take different decisions at particular times, but the most important thing is that the systems are in place so that a young person can engage. And that's not saying, I don't think telling any child to just not use drugs or not go, I think it's too simplistic. And I wish it wasn't. I just know that, you know, even when you look at people going into schools, you know, and the whole don't use drugs, and I think we need to take a look at our communities and our society, and what kind of environments that our children are actually grown up in, that they feel so traumatized at the age of 12 and 14 that it's not drug use, it's drug abuse. So there's another part of society that engage in drug use, you know, whether they're experimenting later in life, or they're gone to college and they're going to a festival and they've decided to try a joint and all these things. And I think that's something I learned as I got older, like the difference between drug abuse and drug use. And communities like mine are involved in drug abuse at a very, very early age, and we need to look at why that's what we are drawn towards as a way to cope, and are we actually coping with way too much? So I think I would put it more so on adults and the education system and the community structures to try and create alternative responses, instead of always expecting, I suppose, the individual child to feel inspired to do something different. Although, of course, that's what I would want them to do, you know, and hope that they can do.
I think even looking back earlier in your story, Lynn, like when you witnessed that death and that huge trauma, and then to go into school 2 days later and it's as if it's forgotten or ignored, and there was nobody kind of coming in at that point and kind of going, look, this really horrible, awful thing has happened with you, and these are the supports for that, you know, even coming in at an earlier stage. I think it's something we try to do a lot with our kids, is we think we're protecting them by going, you know, they're too young to understand, or, you know, if we talk about it, it's making it worse. Whereas the opposite is the case, of having those difficult conversations kind of as needed.
Yeah, and I think my parents probably would have checked in with me all day. How you doing? Like, are you all right?
Mm.
You know, my mom is really practical, so she would have been making sure, you know, I had fresh pajamas and the bat, you know, I run you a bat. So everything was a practical, you know, my mom's extremely one of the most supportive people I've ever met, but it's in the practical sense. And so, like, I felt that maybe at the time, like, there was 7 of us on that road that night, and so it seeped right through the school system, actually, because we were actually across 3 or 4 class ages. So it was from first year to we had no transition year, so it was from first year to 5th year, or first year to 3rd year that was impacted. So but nobody ever came to us. Like, I mean, I don't know whether, you know, the health service also needs to look at, when it responds to an accident such as that there's some sort of system and safety net put in place for anybody that witnesses that, you know, that there's some sort of follow-up.
And debriefing, yeah.
Yeah, or some offer of you know, community outreach or counselling, or referring you into your local like social prescribing. Do you know what I mean? Like, what the hospital might not be able to provide you with anything, but if they know that 6 or 7 or even 1 young person has witnessed this traumatic thing, well, then there should be some sort of mechanism that kicks in to make sure that there's some sort of follow-up in terms of, because we know the psychological impact that something like that can have, and each child will respond differently, you know, and I'm sure out of all of us, we still talk about it, and like, we would have all obviously had different responses and would have responded differently, but we were all hugely impacted. And yeah, it was very much just not spoke about again.
Yeah. And I suppose you were talking, like, the PTSD, the symptoms, you know, and the practicality of how your mum was trying to support you during that time, and it was probably throughout every household. It was all, survival was all about practicality, and, you know, with the food on the table, you were clean and put to bed and whatever. But, you know, you were talking there about, you know, the importance of, if maybe if the school systems, or if there had been therapy services or whatever, that would have allowed, you know, some form of expression, you know, for you to be able to express those feelings that you had, you know, around, you know, the loss of what you witnessed. And because in Lucan and throughout, you know, from Newcastle to Leaks, there's been so many deaths within our, you know, and we know of 2 recent ones of, you know, the family, you know, and that really impacts you know, communities and so on. So and it just doesn't go away after the funeral. And I suppose, you know, again, we could move into another direction here when we talk about grief, and, you know, and all the different stages of how, you know, from a child's point of view to an adult's point of view, to, you know, around how we as individuals, you know, manage, you know, our emotional response. But as children, we you know, we don't have that. And I know Aisling is, you know, you're the expert, Lynn, on it, because you've been through that process. But Aisling is our child therapist, and that's what she works with. And, you know,
I've always really compared the level of debt in a community like this to what in relative terms, a war zone of our own relative feeling. Do you know what I mean? So this anticipation of who's next, like, to be a child at 13, 14, right up to in your 20s around here, and be looking at your friends and going, who next? Or I remember, like, some summers we got to maybe, you know, May, and nobody had died, and you're kind of checking the date, like, you know, and you're kind of, because it became such a thing that you expected all the time. And what I found really sad is how the level of acclimatized to that pain I became, that I got to the stage in my when I was around 20 that I stopped even expressing grief at all, because it was so expected. I expected people to die, which meant I kept grieving less. And that came out in other ways, because the anger that I had as a young teen, it didn't go away. It grew and it grew and it grew into just a bigger, and then it was just coming out everywhere. Do you know what I mean? Anything could trigger it. I wouldn't have to be thinking about my friends, or I wouldn't be having to think about the things that I experienced. So I just looked like a very angry and not a very nice person when I would just lash out. But there had never been any connections made right back to the event when I was 12 or 13, that this was still a symptom of an unmet need in me to be able to resolve very hard situations that I experienced. And in terms of grief, I suppose at 35 now, I've been grieving my whole life in different ways. I've had my 15-year-old self thinks about my friends passing away in a very different way than my 30-year-old self does. At a time I expected it when we were younger. Now I look back and I know that that shouldn't have happened, and that that's unfair, and that's when I went to Trinity and I would look at young people, and I was able to look at what we experienced and how I had friends that were mature students, say, that were returning to college, or they might have been doing their PhD and they're in their 50s and they'd never lost a friend. And I remember going, wow, like, you know, and really getting that analysis of, oh God, like, we shouldn't have been dying, and we shouldn't be dying. And that unnatural end to life at such a young age is really traumatic. I'm really good with death at the other end of life. I'll sit with you and I'll hold your hand, and I think it's actually beautiful. And I've sat with men in the homeless sector who've reached their 70s, and we've sang while they died, you know. So you had all these beautiful experiences with grief, even though their lives might not have been great up until that point, but just an end, a natural end to life. And unfortunately around here, kids are experiencing an unnatural end to life monthly, you know, and that will have intergenerational impacts for many, many years. Like the kids that Aisling works with now are going to be the same adults that their grandchildren are still experiencing the effects of that amount of trauma in one community. And, you know, I think sometimes as well, what we try to then separate parents from their own histories as well. So I think there's something that happens to us then that we feel guilty or bad that we haven't managed to change the course of our community's destination, or our children's destination. But unfortunately, we grew up into traumatized adults. And no matter how much we wanted our children's lives to flourish and succeed, you can't separate us from our history too. We didn't just learn and understand how to successfully navigate our way through the education system and through university and into a career just because we know that it's something that might be better for our children, you know. And it's like, you know, that intergenerational stuff is so important for us to try and unravel. And I think that's why, like, everything from play therapy to working with the family as a whole, and you know, it's very hard to end intergenerational poverty or trauma if you're only ever working with the one person, because at some stage they feel they need to leave the traumatic environment for them to just succeed separate to their family connections, you know.
So what would you say differently to, you know, with all your learning, and you're displaying a huge amount of learning there, but what would you say to parents of now? I mean, not looking back at your own parents, but your own parents, as you mentioned, your mum, and sadly your dad in 2015, but your mum was a practical sort of person. What could parents, you know, like, your parents were trying to support you, they were trying to look after you, they were trying to do everything, but yet you were running off, taking risks. What could parents today facing the same situation do differently?
I think one of the biggest things I would love to see for parents is for them to be able to be their own advocates and their children's advocates. And I think, unfortunately, when you've experienced, you know, I can only speak in relative terms to my own community, when you've experienced being let down by society so much, you kind of disengage even from the external supports that might help your child or yourself, because you've been so let down. So you fail to see that this might be a positive step. So instead you try and do everything yourself without ever asking for help and without ever appearing to be vulnerable. I think especially for the women that I've worked with who have been in active addiction, because I developed addiction services for a long time, and a lot of the women that I worked with, they so wanted their children not to end up in the life that they did of addiction, but because of pure fear of being judged and shamed as women and as mothers, and being fearful that social services will knock on their door if they reach out and ask for help, or say they're struggling with their mental health. So I think for parents, there has to be some level of trust rebuilt with the institutions. And I think, unfortunately, we're still very close to so many institutional abuses that there's still a level of paranoia in communities. I work with traveller women, and, you know, the level of trauma that they've experienced in terms of, you know, the cruelty man coming taking their children and talking about social services. And so there's still all this healing that has to be done. And I think that the healing has to happen within homes, but also within institutions, and we need trust again. So I think parents that want support and want help, they need to find at least one, or, you know, at the very least one other person that has maybe worked their way through a system, or navigated their way through a system, or got support for their family, and try and trust in the process with at least one person, and allow someone into that space, allow someone in to help. My parents tried, but I think it's very hard to judge all children off me, because I was so volatile, you know, I was just so volatile, and not everybody is going to need the level of intervention that I probably needed. Obviously it's a whole spectrum, but I think parents, finding somebody to ask for help. I asked for help at a very young age as a mother. I mean, I involved Bernardo's in my daughter's life from a very young age, because even though I managed to successfully raise a beautiful 20-year-old, you know, amazing actor, artist, activist, going to Trinity, all them things, but it didn't come easy, and I struggled as a mother, and I struggled with anger, and that would have bounced off her, and she would have been sucking that up, you know. I was growing up with her. I was a child, she was a child, and so I knew that I needed help. So I would have reached out to Bernardo's when she was 3 or 4. I would have, even when I was messing up, I was still reaching out, going, I'm messing up, or I know I'm having an impact here, I need help, you know what I mean? And I would just encourage people to ask for that help, because insights from other people can be a real life-saving thing. But then they can also be a negative thing, because if you're seeking insights from people that have also been severely let down, they'll just tell you, oh, don't even bother that, you know, the waiting list is too long there, or they wouldn't even give me help down there. So sometimes your own circle has also had a negative experience of seeking help. And I suppose that goes back to the first point I said earlier on about how do kids engage in help. I suppose I'm going back to that idea of how do we create help easier to access.
And that's something that we've tried to do over the last 20 years here in Aspen, you know, having the low cost program here, that, you know, making therapy accessible, because for a lot of people, you know, there are waiting lists, and the reality is you could be a year waiting for CAMS, you could be, you know, and then you get the assessment and whatever. The same for adults as well. So, you know, you can access therapy within 24, 48 hours here, because we have a team of 38 therapists.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
But again, money can stop people from coming, you know, to fee €30. That's still a lot of money, but we don't get the funding that, you know, again, that's another conversation. But look,
it's a piece of the puzzle as well, you know, in terms of how much we value the services we look to provide to people, because we'll blame them for their situations turning bad, but we won't invest in them to ensure that they don't. And that's a real issue, I think, in Irish society.
And I know for you working in the Senate as well, and working alongside, before Joan resigned, Joan Freeman, like, I mean, certainly she's a champion for trying to, you know, support mental health and you know, putting the services in place for children too. And we are ourselves delighted to have the likes of Aisling on board, because it's really difficult to get paid therapists to work with children on that, you know, at that level, that have been, you know, deeply traumatized, and because it's trying to undo the damage that's been done, whether systemically or, you know, or whatever they've experienced through marriage separations, or yeah. So you've had an interesting story, and and even listening to you there telling how wonderful your daughter is doing herself, and it sounds like she has used all your skill sets in that, in breaking the cycle, whether she's experienced anger from you or whatever, but she's become an actress herself today. Is that what you said?
She's definitely, I think Jordan is a very insightful old soul, and she's very, very deep, and she has had an emotional intelligence since she was very, very young. And I think whatever about me using her skills, I think at times it's been the other way around. I think she has actually developed some better skills than I did, that I've had to learn from her. And and I still am learning from her and my younger daughter, which is amazing, because I can somewhat sit back and go, okay, like maybe they do have a lot more of the skills that I was lacking at that young age, to be able to have an emotional intelligence to know when I'm harming myself and when I'm not harming myself, and having a value on myself. And Jordan would have went to Oncasan with me when I was when I had her at 15. I went to Oncasan to education for 2 years. So she would have had an early intervention of education for 2 years in Rainbow House within Oncasan. And it's when she discovered her ability for art at such a young age, and she nurtured that. And so I think that's another key piece, is about how we can ensure young mothers or people are supported at every level of their seeking out of engagement within the system. I got to get a foundation of some level of education before I moved on to work in addiction, but she also got support, and it meant then that there was a community around me that I might not have had I had been left isolated, rearing my daughter at home with nothing to do and nowhere to go.
Even just listen to art. Imagine a child being exposed to art therapy. What a wonderful way to express maybe what was going on for her at the age of 2.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. So she's been really tuning into herself since
she has.
The day you started your own healing.
Yes.
In going into Oncasan, which is wonderful. And I suppose we're talking about death, and we're talking about grief, and and how you managed your emotional response in the PTSD. And today, we're hearing every day the count. Yesterday was 23. Those that died, and every day we're all holding our breath to see what's the number going to be, and and there's so much around that, isn't there? It's like a war zone at the moment, because we're trying to hear.
Yeah.
Listen to say, okay, how many today, and our world is in shutdown.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult, and I think, like, I've obviously reached out and engaged in therapy in one way or another for 20 years, and I still do. And obviously during the last 6 to 8 weeks, what them therapeutic spaces look like has dramatically changed for people. I've a lot of friends in recovery circles who are trying to engage and connect online in online AA and NA and CA and whatever. And then the drug services, which I support, are trying to deliver their services online. So the connection being there, but it all looking very, very different. So I think loss and grief is connected to looking at, unfortunately, a death toll, but also the way we've done things and how we've engaged. And I look at some of the women who lived for the 3 times a week that they went to the local community project, or that their kid was in after school while they done something with the family resource centre. So there's so much loss, and it's not just the physical loss of people, but our rituals and how we do things. I think we should be able to sit back and acknowledge that everybody has lost a lot, some more than others, but people will deal with their situations that are relative to them. And my nanny died throughout all of this, and the experience of funerals in this time was a strange experience. And my granddad, he's in his 80s, Catholic man, is not getting to do the rituals that he always would have done, and he can't visit his wife in Glasnevin, and so the loss of her is one thing, but the loss of how he expected to grieve her is also a thing, and he's having to learn, well, what do I do now? How do I process this now? And you know, I think we're a very ritualistic country, so it's hard to just find new ways at the drop of a hat, especially if you're, you know, you're older and you've engaged in mass every morning, and that's now taken away, you know.
And I think you're left. I've experienced a loss as well in the last couple of weeks too. So, you know, a similar experience of the whole funeral, and, you know, obviously the funeral happens, and that part of the ritual is still there, and it's really important. And then there's that after piece of, well, normally you'd go off and maybe celebrate this person, or you'd be around friends and hugging and crying and talking, you know, and that whole piece is gone, and it really has to be put on pause until, you know, everything is somewhat back to normal or whatever. And so that delayed kind of grief, for, you know, is there. We're still grieving, but it's completely different, not like anything you would have experienced before.
I think what I found interesting, I done a piece online last week with Dermot Ling and Patrick O'Leary from a band called I Have Tribe, and they done a piece. Oh no, actually it wasn't that. It was a piece I done with the Science Gallery on the science of grief. And it was really, really interesting, and it gave me a lot to think about. So when you mentioned celebration, so usually we'd comfort each other and we'd share stories of, do you remember they done this, and do you remember they done that, and instead you're just at home in mourning. And it kind of got me really thinking, because I was listening to a woman at the Signs of Grief speaking about how we didn't always celebrate the passing of life, that actually through keening we mourned for a period of time. But with the turn of Christianity, it was, no, you have to celebrate that somebody has passed on. And, you know, so there's been all these times throughout history that we've actually grieved very differently. And I think I found some solace in thinking about my nanny and doing a little bit of research about how people used to grieve. And I was watching keening processes online and going, all right, not everybody can obviously, you know, engage or might not suit everyone. But I did find it interesting to actually look at how we grieve and try and see, was there ways that could help.
But wasn't there a time back then, you know, that there were actually women that would just do the keening?
Yes.
For the community.
Yes.
So it wasn't that everybody was,
No.
Yeah.
I think the main thread, though, is that it was the coming together, and that's kind of where the healing happens, in the connection and the coming together. And that obviously looks so different now.
Yeah.
Like, and even, you know, it's why we have therapy, that, you know, you don't do this kind of healing on your own. It isn't coming together with someone in the relationship, and it's why funerals and things are such an important deal to support each other.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and that's all changed now, and obviously it's great we've got these online things like that to bring people together in that way, but it's such a massive shift. It needs to, like Carmel was saying, the grieving process will need to be honoured in time.
Yeah,
definitely.
I agree. I think there's a huge amount in acknowledging, I suppose, that there's a level of aloneness in one's journey, but they go that journey alone while facilitated and coming together with other people, you know, in terms of their journey through their pain, and that coming together is very much removed in one sense, but hopefully some people can seek it out in some way, whether that be through accessing their supports online, but that won't obviously be true for everyone.
Yeah.
Do you think we'll go back to a normal way?
Well, for me, normal wasn't good enough. So, you know, in terms of how we ensure that people do have access to supports, it's very hard to know what things will look like. I think there's an anxiety in me as a national politician of what I'm about to face into. There's a fear because I've seen what happened during the years of austerity and how we fought that so hard in terms of protecting our services, protecting our people. And, you know, COVID, we can identify where it's taken people's lives. With austerity, it was taking people's lives, but we couldn't go, you know, well, that policy, that done that. And, you know, so, you know, you're kind of fobbed off. With COVID, we can very much see it. And we can see the impacts, we can see what it's doing. And that's kind of scary, because we all now, as politicians and service provision, are facing into a time where, you know, we have to justify why we work and how we work and who we're working with and why we should be funded. And we've been doing that for a long, long time, you know. And now you're going to multiply the trauma that's left from people experiencing what they've experienced over the last few months. But I hope there's also a level of healing for some people too, because if you're in a privileged enough position that your household is not a space of trauma and that your household is an actual sanctuary, you know, people are reconnecting at some level as well with who they are or their interests or how they view life or what they want to think about. But I think that's probably for people that are at a level of their lives where they can engage with that big question and they can sit at home with those questions. But for other people, their lives are chaotic and traumatic and they are experiencing huge loss. And I don't think we'll go back to how things were. But I think that the fight is probably going to be bigger than ever to ensure that people are minded through the process of the next 10 years or so.
Because one of the things that I've really picked up on in regards to what the government has been doing and has been doing is, you know, really emphasising the importance of minding your mental health, and, you know, and the facilities that they've put in place, like even linking in with different, you know, people, whether they be sports people or, you know, and rolling out stuff online, exercises online. And so I know South Dublin County Council, the partnership is kind of rolling that type of stuff out, trying to support people. But do you think that the government are really going to, you know, from, you know, not just because of COVID, but yet there has been a lot of anxiety, you know, that people have had to sit with, you know, with the uncertainty, but you think that they're actually going to invest more with mental health and our organisations that are out there? I know that's another.
Yeah, I'm always slow, I suppose, to make assumptions on what governments will do, because I'm still in that naive space where I believe and I hope that people will come through, even though I've experienced that in the past that they haven't. I'm hoping that this is something that has impacted politicians in a way that they understand it. I think up until now politicians have spoke very abstractly about people's mental health, or they've spoken a very abstract way about how, you know, communities with high mental deprivation experience things. But I think with COVID, I'm hoping that they really, really understand the impacts of this because they've experienced it and because they have the lived experience of that they will invest. So I'm hoping, because they're living it with us this time, where usually in the struggles that I've had, they haven't been living it with me. So they don't really understand, even though some will try to understand and some just will refuse your experience to you or deny your own reality of how you've experienced life. But I think I'm hopeful that with this, politicians have experienced it in a similar way, and understand the massive ramifications of how people's lives have been impacted. So I'm going in with that hope, but with huge caution, obviously, that maybe the next 5 years of me being in there is going to be similar to what life was like for me as an activist back in 2010. And yeah, I'm just going to have to face into that and hopefully do the right thing. Yeah.
And Lynn, on that note, I suppose, how are you looking after your mental health at this time? What are you doing for yourself? Yeah,
so I cycle every day for an hour. I'm sitting out the back a lot when I'm doing my work to get the small bit of sun. I wouldn't have got to sit out much because I would have worked 10 hours a day for years or stuck in college or so yeah, I'm spending time with friends online, whether it be doing a quiz or just having a laugh. Tonight I'm doing a thing called moon medicine, which is very hippy dippy for me. I'm not usually that hippy dippy, but I'm like, sure, look, I'll give anything a go at this stage. So that would be with over 100 women from all around the world. We'll be online on Zoom. So I'm just trying to stay connected to people. And I'm really enjoying watching my daughters actually. There's a 7.5 year age gap. And the age gap is now non-existent in the household because they don't have their own peer groups, I suppose, to meet their needs. So they've met somewhere in the middle, and they're doing art and having sleepovers in their rooms and watching films. So my mental health is positively impacted by watching their sisterly relationship flourish. Jordan, who is on the ASD spectrum, is using art like she always has since she's a baby. So she's making books for her friends. So she's painting these books and stories and poems, and she'll post them out to her friends. And she's drawing pictures for me to send to my friends. And yeah, so she's using her art. And Lynn is teaching herself how to do makeup.
Brilliant.
They're all developing their
We're
skills.
as a family, yeah.
But developing their, improving on their skills as well.
Yeah. I think there's a huge need in us as humans at any stage to feel useful or purposefulness, and I think if we can seek that out somehow, if it's as much as learning how to put eyeshadow on, or I'm also writing a screenplay, so I was up at 6 o'clock this morning typing away on that for my master's in creative writing that I'm doing. So we're all engaged in our interests.
Yeah. You've more time. You've a bit more time, less commute. You can sit outside, getting your vitamin D. And
I'm also cooking the kids' dinners and lunches, and they're kind of like, where have you been the last 20 years? So I'm enjoying getting to. I'm trying to find, I suppose, the positives. And one of those positives is us getting to rebond as a family, so which is nice.
Wonderful. So we kind of sum it up with that, and I'm really, I suppose, Lynn, I know you tell your story from the age of, being a young girl growing up in Killinarden and the adversity that you experienced, and that early trauma and that death, how that really shaped you into who you are today, and trying to manage undiagnosed at the time, I suppose, substances and behaviours that you use as a way to manage your emotions, has brought you to where you're at today, and different, I suppose, learning experiences. And it's been wonderful listening to your story and sharing it. I hope, your story will impact maybe anybody that's listening to this talk today. And I suppose I just want to send a message out to people to know that we are still working online. We're still here for people, from children as young as 4 and to people into their 80s, that if you want to avail of therapy online, certainly call us today on 6217063, and that's Aspen Counselling. And hopefully by the 8th of June, we will be reopened once we put all our, all our health sanitizers and all the stuff in place, that we can have people back into the centre. Because I know we've missed having you guys in here as well, because clients become almost like family too in the work that we do. So I want to thank you, Lynn, and I want to thank Aisling and William and Carmel for joining us here today, and look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you.